if you thought the Book of Enoch's account of the Watchers who descended to Earth was kind of spooky, or if you thought that the stories of their bloodthirsty, cannibalistic giant children were scary, or if you thought that the description of their gloomy, dark underworld prison sounded terrifying, just wait until what comes next. Because Enoch is going to see something that shocks him more than zombie fallen angels, more than death cult nephilim, and more than the dungeons of hell. Enoch is going to see God. And God ends up being more overwhelming than anything else that Enoch has seen so far. Now, maybe you're saying, hey Luke, wait a minute. Enoch couldn't have seen God. In Exodus 33:20, God tells Moses, "You cannot see my face, for man shall not see me and live." So why do you expect me to believe that Enoch saw God and then survived to tell us about it? Well, that's a good question, but Abraham saw God, Daniel saw God, Jacob saw God, Ezekiel saw God, Isaiah saw God, and they all lived to tell the tale. So how can that Exodus verse be true if several Bible figures themselves have seen God? Well, I find this to be weird, and I'd like to explore why it's in the Bible. And yeah, we'll also look at what Enoch wrote down as well when he met God face to face. Turn to Ezekiel 1, and let's get weird. Welcome to Weird Stuff in the Bible, where we explore scripture passages that are bizarre, perplexing, or just plain weird. This is Luke Taylor, and we are in a series of episodes right now digging into the Book of Enoch. And today it's something a bit more positive, although it's still very intimidating. We are going to talk about Enoch's visit to heaven, including Enoch's glimpse of God himself. Now, I understand why that might make some people uncomfortable. I don't like all these extra biblical spiritual experiences, Luke. Well, here's what I find so fascinating about Enoch's record of this. It is exactly like what you've read about in the Bible when other people had heavenly visitations. I mean, it's kind of like if you took all of them and just put them together. And so if you're worried that you're going to read something today that's just wild and crazy and doesn't line up with the Bible, hang with me. I think you're going to be surprised at what you hear. But first, I want to deal with this tension that I introduced in the introduction. How can someone see God and live, and yet lots of people in the Bible see God and live? And not only that, 1 Timothy 1:16, it says, God dwells in unapproachable light, whom no one has ever seen or can see. 1 John 4:12 tells us, no one has ever seen God. So how can we reconcile this with all the passages that speak of people seeing God, even Moses, whom Scripture says that met with God face to face? That's what it said in Exodus 33:11, which is the same chapter where God says that no one can see my face and live. So to understand this, let's look at what Moses specifically asks in that chapter. Exodus 33:18 begins, Moses said, please show me your glory. Okay? Glory. Moses is like, hit me full blast, God. I want it all. And that's pretty bold to ask for, right? I mean, if you ask me, Moses was Pentecostal before that was even a thing. And God tells him, Moses, you don't even know what you're asking. Verse 19, and he said, I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim before you my name, the Lord. And I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. But he said, you cannot see my face, for man shall not see me and live. And the Lord said, behold, there is a place by me where you shall stand on the rock, and while my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft of the rock, and I will cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen. So Moses is able to see God, but kind of indirectly, okay? Not God's full glory, because then it would have been like a bug in a bug zapper. Moses would have been fried. And so we see that some people can behold God, but in a very shielded way. Most of the time when people met with God in the Old Testament, like Jacob wrestling with God in the book of Genesis, or Abraham's visits from God to his home, well, these are instances where God appeared in a human body. Now, perhaps it was even a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus. And then there's other times in the Bible where God appeared in different forms, but he was still obscured, obscured by a cloud, or like at the end of Job, he's in a giant whirlwind. And then there are the heavenly or visionary experiences of prophets like Isaiah and Ezekiel, and they see God a bit more directly, but it's kind of like they can't look right at him, like it's just too much. And so to show this a bit, let's look at one of these. Go with me to the first chapter of Ezekiel. Ezekiel 1:1 says, I was among the exiles by the Chebar Canal. The heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. He continues in verse 4, as I looked, behold, a stormy wind came out of the north, and a great cloud with brightness around it, and fire flashing forth continually. And in the midst of the fire, as it were, gleaming metal. And from the midst of it came the likeness of 4 living creatures, and this was their appearance. They had a human likeness, but each had 4 faces, and each of them had 4 wings. So the first thing he sees are these cherubim, okay? It looks like cherubim. I say it that way sometimes with the CH sound. I forget that a lot of times in the Bible, in the Hebrew, the CH is pronounced like a K. And so technically it's cherubim. Singular is cherub, plural is cherubim. And I want you to notice how detailed in his description of these beings. Their legs were straight, and the soles of their feet were like the sole of a calf's foot, and they sparkled like burnished bronze. Under their wings, on their 4 sides, they had human hands, and the 4 had their faces and their wings thus. Their wings touched one another. Each one of them went straight forward without turning as they went. As for the likeness of their faces, each had a human face. The 4 had the face of a lion on the right side, the 4 had the face of an ox on the left side, and the 4 had the face of an eagle. Such were their faces. And their wings were spread out above. Each creature had 2 wings. And I know this is a lot of detail, guys. That's the point here. I know it's hard to keep up with all this detail, but you know what? Let me stop there. I mean, this goes on for a while. He goes into like specific detail about the faces and the wings, and I won't even read it all. The next thing Ezekiel talks about is the wills of the cherubim. Each of the cherubim have a will that they are controlling. And Ezekiel spends 11 verses talking about these gyroscopic wills. And then he speaks about the expanse also there around the cherubim with these beautiful crystals. Like, I don't even know how to imagine the things that he saw. But then at the end of Ezekiel chapter 1, he sees God, verses 26 through 28. And above the expanse over their heads, there was the likeness of a throne, in appearance like sapphire. And seated above the likeness of a throne was a likeness with a human appearance. And upward from what had the appearance of his waist, I saw, as it were, gleaming metal, like the appearance of fire enclosed all around. And downward from what had the appearance of his waist, I saw, as it were, the appearance of fire. And there was brightness all around him. Like the appearance of the bow that is in the cloud on the day of rain, so was the appearance of the brightness all around. And that's all that he says of God. Like, Ezekiel sees the cherubim, and he went on for 11 verses. He went on for another 11 verses about the wills and the expanse. And then when he sees God, there's only 3 verses. And it's very unclear what he's seeing. He said he got on his throne. It was a likeness with a human appearance. So in other words, Ezekiel, he's saying he was kind of like a person. And then Ezekiel said, from his waist up, he looked like fiery metal. And from his waist down, he looked like fire and brightness. So again, it just doesn't tell us a whole lot, not a lot of detail, okay? So here's what I'm gathering from all this. It was very hard for Ezekiel to look directly at God and see any specific features. And he finished verse 28, such was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And when I saw it, I fell on my face, and I heard the voice of one speaking. So he could not behold God's glory. He only saw the appearance of the likeness of the glory, and that was all Ezekiel could take, and he was done. He was on his face. Let's look at someone else who saw the Lord, Isaiah. Isaiah 6 reads, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called to another and said, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundations of the threshold shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. And I said, woe is me, for I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips, for my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Now, why did Isaiah say that? Did he have a cussing problem? I don't think that Isaiah had a cussing problem. This reminds me of something my 7-year-old, he said this at the dinner table. It was a few months ago. So we're sitting there eating supper, and you never know what's going to come out of a 7-year-old's mouth sometimes. It seems like whenever we're supposed to eat dinner, there's a lot more coming out of his mouth than whatever's going in. And so he turns to me and he says, "Daddy, have you ever called mommy the B word?" And my wife and I freeze. Like, we're just looking at each other like, what? As far as I know, my 7-year-old doesn't even know what a cuss word is. So, what would even make him ask a question like this? We don't even know. And so with my heart, like about halfway up my esophagus, I'm just like, what do you think the B word is? And he says, beautiful. Whew, okay. Dodged a bullet on that one. Okay. And I have called my wife beautiful, by the way. I have not called her the B word. And I don't think Isaiah called his wife the B word either. I don't think Isaiah had a potty mouth. This man was a prophet of God. And yet, when he comes face to face with an obscured, cloudy vision of the glory of God, he's like, oh, I am undone. I am a man of unclean lips. Like he just knew he didn't measure up. We spoke of how how Job saw God. And again, God was obscured in a tornado at this point, and it was very indirect. And yet, even Job, he says in chapter 42, I have heard of you by the hearing of my ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore, I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. Now, was Job some terrible person? Well, this is what God said about Job in chapter 1. There is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. And so that's what God thought of Job. And yet even Job, when he sees the Lord, Job can't handle it. Coming into contact with that degree of holiness, it makes him realize how far that he comes up short. And if you want some similar encounters with the glory of God, you can look at Genesis 17:3 or Revelation 1:17 or Hebrews 12:21. But for the rest of our time today, I want us to check out Enoch's personal encounter with God. And so in our journey through the book of Enoch, we are in the middle of chapter 14. We're going to finish that chapter up today. And Enoch, he's been passing messages back and forth between the watchers down in the underworld and God up in heaven. And last time, a heavenly messenger had brought him God's response. Well, this time Enoch is going to be raptured right up into heaven itself. And so Enoch 14 reads, "And the vision was shown to me thus. Behold, in the vision clouds invited me, and a mist summoned me. And the course of the stars and the lightnings sped and hastened me. And the winds in the vision caused me to fly and lifted me upward and bore me into heaven. And I went in till I drew nigh to a wall which is built of crystals." So let me stop right here. I just want you to notice so far how many elements from what we've read about already when people had these heavenly visitations, well, how many of those are appearing right here as Enoch goes into the heavenly realm. He saw a mist, a cloud, lightnings, wind, crystals. And listen to this next part. He says, built of crystals and surrounded by tongues of fire. And so I read that. I'm like, tongues of fire. Like, what does that make you think of? That reminds me of Acts 2. But remember, the book of Enoch was written before Acts. Scholars debate about exactly how old the book of Enoch is, but we know that these first 36 chapters of Enoch, they predated Christ. They predated the first century. And Enoch here, he saw tongues of fire up in heaven. So I was going to do a whole episode on tongues of fire, but I decided just to make that a newsletter. So here's your plug for this weekend's newsletter. If you want to learn more about what the phrase tongues of fire means, that's what you can sign up for. I would have done a whole episode on it, but it just ended up being really simple to understand. And so I'm just going to put it out in this weekend's newsletter. You can sign yourself up for it in the show notes. If you come across this episode later, that link in the show notes will take you to an archive of all the past newsletters. So just look for the one that came out on May 31st of 2026. We're going to keep reading for right now. So Enoch writes, "And it began to affright me. And I went into the tongues of fire, and drew nigh to a large house which was built of crystals. And the walls of the house were like a tessellated floor made of crystals, and its groundwork was of crystal." So there's this house of crystals When it says house, it's not like a little neighborhood domicile for like a mom, a dad, and 2 kids. This is like a complex. This is like a palace that he sees here, and it's made of crystals. Now, think of how precious crystals are here on Earth. Okay, you put them in a ring. You put a crystal in a necklace, right? If it's large enough, you might put it on display at a museum because they're so rare and so precious. In heaven, they use crystals as construction material, right? We know that they pave the streets with gold. Okay, everything in heaven, it's that magnificent. It's that opulent. The floor is tessellated. If you're wondering what tessellated means, dictionary.com says tessellated is an adjective used to describe patterns of shapes that fit together perfectly without any gaps. And so in heaven, just like all this stuff is perfectly constructed. Let's go on. So Enoch, he's just in the lobby of this building or palace right here now. He says, its ceiling was like the path of the stars and the lightnings, and between them were fiery cherubim, and their heaven was clear as water. A flaming fire surrounded the walls, and its portals blazed with fire. And I entered into that house, and it was hot as fire and cold as ice. Now, that doesn't even make sense, guys. How can something be hot as fire and cold as ice at the same time? I don't even have any idea what that means. You know, you remember how Paul, he saw heaven, he said, and he couldn't even put into words what it was like. I feel like that's what Enoch is saying right here. No wonder God had to rapture him out of the world. They probably would have put him in the loony bin with all this, hot as fire and cold as ice talk. Like, what does that even mean? We won't know until we get there. There were no delights of life therein. Fear covered me, and trembling got hold upon me. And I quaked and trembled. I fell upon my face. Enoch didn't even get through the lobby before he passed out. So next he wakes up, and now he said he's in a bigger palace. And I beheld a vision, and lo, there was a second house, greater than the former. And the entire portal stood open before me, and it was built of flames of fire. So guys, we've been talking about like portals in the spirit realm. We've been talking about this for over a year now. Here is your first description of what one of these things looks like. Okay, this portal before Enoch, it is made of flames. It said the borders of the portal are flaming. You know, if you've ever seen the Marvel movies, you've probably seen Doctor Strange's portals, how they're these like sparkling circles that like kind of form there in the air in front of him when he circles his hands around. I don't know if the heavenly portals, if they're circular or rectangular or what, but it said the border of these portals, it's flaming. Now, a portal is it means an opening, okay? It's like a doorway without a door. If you remember, a few episodes ago, I was talking about the Apostle John when he was raptured to heaven, and he said a door opened in heaven. You know, that's Revelation 4:1. Well, remember this, the Book of Enoch, what we have is preserved in Greek, and the Greek word for portal right here in Enoch's book, the word is thura, okay? That's the same word that the Apostle John used when he was talking about this door in heaven, which I told you in that episode. It just basically means an opening. Okay, so I said I think that's a spiritual portal. It's the same Greek word that's translated portal right here in Enoch 14. What the Bible calls a door or an opening, it has this fiery frame. It takes you to another realm. It's what Enoch is calling a portal. And so he went through it, and here is what he says. And in every respect, it so excelled in splendor and magnificence and extent that I cannot describe to you its splendor and its extent. Again, just like what Paul said, I don't even have words for it, okay? And its floor was of fire, and above it were lightnings in the path of the stars, and its ceiling also was flaming fire. And I looked and saw therein a lofty throne. Its appearance was as crystal, and the wheels thereof as the shining sun. And there was the vision of the cherubim, and from underneath the throne came streams of flaming fire, that I could not look thereon. Like, what an amazing phrase. A throne with wheels, streams of flaming fire. Now, if that sounds familiar, let me just remind you what Daniel saw when Daniel had a vision of heaven. Daniel 7:9 and 10 says, As I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. And so that's what Daniel said. Now here's what Enoch says as he looked at the figure on the throne. And the great glory sat thereon, and his raiment shone more brightly than the sun, and was whiter than any snow. None of the angels could enter and could behold his face by reason of the magnificence and glory, and no flesh could behold him. So Enoch says here, not even the angels could gaze upon the Lord. Wow, not even the angels. And so is that biblical? Well, when Isaiah saw his throne room vision of heaven, it said he saw the seraphim and they had their faces covered as they flew over the Lord. That's what it said in Isaiah 6:2. Now let me finish up what Enoch saw whenever he saw the Lord. The flaming fire was round about him, and a great fire stood before him, and none around could draw nigh him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him, yet he needed no counselor. And the most holy ones who were nigh to him did not leave by night, nor depart from him. And until then I had been prostrate on my face, trembling, and the Lord called me with his own mouth and said to me, Come hither, Enoch, and hear my word. And one of the holy ones came to me and waked me, and he made me rise up and approach the door, and I bowed my face downwards. So just as the biblical characters reported, okay, Enoch fell on his face when he sees the Lord. I mean, a lot of the things that Enoch saw, they're just like what the Bible reports. And so that gives me confidence that like this vision that it writes about here in the Book of Enoch, that this has been accurately preserved. Now, there's a couple details that are a little unique to Enoch's version. One, the portals of heaven, he describes what those are like. That's pretty cool. Two, Enoch uses the word crystal a lot to describe what he saw. Now, the Bible writers tend to be a little more specific. They use words like lapis lazuli and sapphire. Maybe Enoch had slept through geology class, okay? He didn't know what they're called. He just calls it all crystal. So we don't know what colors he was seeing. And then three, I just like Enoch's name for what he calls the Lord. He calls him the great glory. Let me read that sentence. Let me read that sentence again. And the great glory sat thereon, and his raiment shone more brightly than the sun, and was whiter than any snow. Now, perhaps you're wondering, like, what could it even mean that he was brighter than the sun? Well, I want to read a paragraph from John Bevere's book. It's The Awe of God, and I just couldn't put it any better than this. Joel and Isaiah say that the sun and moon will be darkened and the stars will not shine on the day Jesus returns. Allow me to elaborate. When we walk out on a clear night, what do we see? A sky full of stars. But what happens when the sun comes up in the morning? The stars disappear. We must ask, do all the stars quickly run away as the sun rises? And then when the sun goes down, do the stars suddenly run back out in the night sky? The answer to that question is obviously no. What happens? The glory of the stars is one level, but the glory of the sun is a much greater level. So when the sun comes out, because it is so much brighter than the stars, it darkens them. When Jesus returns, his glory will be so much greater than the sun. He will darken it, even though it will still be burning. Are you getting a better glimpse of his glory? I believe this is why we are told that all the people of the earth are going to cry out to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of the one who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. So again, that's an excerpt from The Awe of God by John Bevere. Thank you to him. And thank you to Enoch, because I feel through this study, I feel like I've gotten a better glimpse of God's glory. And guys, I need to wind this down. I feel like I just need to go pray and just go worship or something. I feel like I need to sit with this for a little while. So give me a minute and we're going to wrap up here shortly with some closing thoughts. Next time on this podcast, I'm going to give you the secret to immortality. No joke, that's what we're going to be talking about next week. We're going to talk about how to live forever. So here's the real question I want to deal with next week. I want to talk about Psalm 82. God threatens the sons of God, or the watchers right there, with death. He says, like men, you will die. But what does it mean for a spiritual being to die? Like, we know what it means when a human being dies. Their mortal body is now deceased, but then they're in the spiritual realm. Well, spirit beings are already in the spirit realm. What does it mean for them to die? Well, that episode, it's going to take us down what I think is one of the most fascinating things that I have learned, not just since we started the Book of Enoch, but in the entire life of this podcast. I am so excited to share it next time. So please make sure you're subscribed so you can get that episode whenever it drops next Wednesday. We're going to look at Enoch chapter 15 and Psalm 82. And I also want to give this shout out to mega super weirdo Caleb. He writes this: I came across your podcast a couple years ago and I've been listening to it ever since. I just want to say that I appreciate you doing this in a biblically grounded way that isn't overly intellectual and only takes a short time. I have recommended this podcast to everyone in my life group, and my 8-year-old son also loves listening to it. So shout out there to Caleb, and hey, shout out to Caleb's son as well. And Caleb, like, if you've been with us that long, I don't even have a word for that level of weird, okay? Like, I dub somebody a weirdo if they've listened to at least 25 episodes. I call them a super weirdo if they've listened to all the episodes. Caleb's been listening for years at this point. I don't even have a category for that. So I guess we'll just stick with super weirdo for now, so then you don't have to update your resume. But on a more serious note, and I said this in my email back to Caleb, like, I feel like this podcast has been a journey. And so I want you all to know, everyone listening, it means more than I can say how many of you are going on this journey with me. So thanks to Caleb. And in closing, guys, portals are cool. Crystals are cool. Cherubim are cool. God is a little more than I can fathom. I get a little bit overwhelmed just reading about all these other people and how they responded to seeing the Lord. I know that I could not behold God in my flesh. Apparently, I still can't even fully behold him in my spirit. And yet the Bible tells us anyway, seek to see the Lord. Matthew 5:11 says, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. When Isaiah came before the Lord, he recognized his own sinfulness. Same with Job, a man that God said was blameless. And then Enoch, he walked with God. And yet he's falling flat on his face, just going into the lobby of God's house. These are great men. We might even say that they were holy men. But God is a holy, holy, holy God. And what does holy mean? Well, in one sense, to be holy means to be weird. Holiness means to be set apart, to be different from the world. Hebrews 12:14 says, strive for peace with everyone and for the holiness without which no one will see the Lord. We have to be holy. We have to be like God if we want to see God. And the more we seek to make ourselves like God, the more the world is going to look at us and say that we're weird. But that's okay. I'm willing to disappoint man if it means gaining the approval of this God who shines with the glory of 1,000 suns. Because someday I'm going to meet this God face to face. So if you're willing to be holy, even if it makes other people sometimes think you're weird, I hope you're a little more holy and weird today too. Thanks for listening. God bless you for sticking around till the end. And we'll see you next time on Weird Stuff in the Bible.